I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Oscar-nominated visual effects supervisor Sean Faden, whose latest work can be seen on the spectacular MCU Phase 4 limited series, Moon Knight. Sean, production on the series finished some time ago. You were in Europe, obviously, working on that. But when you think back, what was your highlight overall from the experience on working on this series?
Well, I'd say was just the amount of different artists that actually came together for this project, right? That was probably the highlight. We had, really one of probably the best production designers I've ever worked with, Stefania Cella, and really one of the greatest costume designers with Megan Kasperlik, and an awesome cinematography team between Greg Milton and Andrew Palermo. We had a good set of artisans sort of putting their minds together for this one. And but I think really it was just it was seeing Oscar Isaac actually create this character, and we from the beginning of first seeing him on set and kind of toward the end actually seeing it screened on the big screen in our we had a premiere where we showed the first 2 episodes. I think seeing that evolution and just seeing how much he was keeping in his head and figure out, that, to see it all finished really kind of is where it made sense. We were all doing our things to kind of support all the story and support everything, but really just seeing his performance, tying it all together was a highlight for me.
I keep hearing that, from department heads on the show that they were they're taken aback by how incredible Oscar was able to fashion these characters. We as the audience were just blown away, and you guys are actually making it. I'm fascinated about your collaboration with that your team and yourself has to have with people like Megan Kasperlik, who did these great costumes, for example, on Scarlet Scarab with the wings, and Stefania Cella. Obviously, you guys are there to help her create scale and add certain elements to her sets. That giant sea barge on the sand, stuff like that. So it seems like an obvious question, but how much of their work is visual effects based or vice versa, and how difficult or challenging is it to make sure that you're all aligned on the same page?
Well, I mean, that was a large part of the time in Budapest was meetings with Megan and Stefania, figuring a lot of that stuff out. And we'd have our meetings with our directors, with Mohammed or with Justin and Aaron. But there was a lot of behind the scenes meetings with just us trying to figure out, okay, well, you do this, we do this, how are we going to get there? And with the costume, which sort of the most obvious, I mean, it's called Moon Knight, so you can't have Moon Knight without a kick-ass costume. And Megan and her team, they built the real one, and that was always sort of the approach was to hope that the costume department will be able to come up with something that was wearable, that looked cool, that could be augmented in CG where necessary, could be recreated in CG where necessary. But she was very collaborative, and she and her team, and they involved us, and we spoke a lot about approaches on not only just the textures and what went into it, but also the layering of the costume and everything. And because we knew it had to transform, we knew that it had to appear. There were a lot of discussions between myself and Megan about what would sort of lend itself to the kind of the coolest looking effect. And one of those things was talking about, it's hard to see it sometimes, but it's there, is this sort of gauze kind of sublayer that is interwoven in mainly in the Moon Knight costume. But even when we created the Mr. Knight transformations, we still kind of made it feel like there was almost like a gauze sublayer that was the basis for all the structure of the suit, whether it was Mr. Knight or Moon Knight. And we had these conversations, and we would kind of it felt like we were kind of figuring out what would be the best version of this suit. Obviously there was so much visual development from Marvel and again Megan and her team and at FBFX in London that actually built the actual suits and made it real, but still there was a lot to figure out, and just in terms of what those materials were. And then of course she shared all that stuff with us so that we gave it to Framestore, who was our lead vendor for building the suit. So they had all material samples. Even before they had finalized the suit, they were getting material samples just so that they could start kind of building and kind of getting their pipeline working, just to kind of understand what was going to be necessary to actually build this suit.
I was just thinking before how the MCU shows these days are so incredible, and you've worked on some really amazing projects. You were just nominated for Milan not long ago. But when you're working on MCU stuff, like if you look back at like WandaVision, Loki, Hawkeye, and now Moon Knight kind of even upped the ante again. I don't know how they can possibly top that. What does it occur to you that you're working on in a particular universe that where the fans are really into it and the studio's really into it? You've got Kevin Feige, who seems to have a lot of creative input. Is it different working on MCU compared to Disney and other projects that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest difference is that involvement between Kevin and Victoria and Lou and Brad. I mean, these guys they're all weighing in at multiple stages along the process. Something that when I was on Mulan and Disney, we had a couple of meetings where we would present works in progress to the head of the studio, but it wasn't the same kind of involvement. And one thing that's really nice with the Marvel process is that they really do respect and collaborate and include the visual effects team as part of the creative process. Wow. It really felt like we were kind of along for the ride the entire time, and we were giving our ideas, and sometimes they were bad ones and sometimes they were good ones, but there was always a back and forth, and we would kind of all reach that the final look of things together. Yeah. So there were a lot of great, I didn't talk about what Stefania had done, but I mean, her team, the production design department, had come up with so many great concept designs, concept art for all these different sequences. And, these were things that were shown super early, in our Marvel VizDev meetings, that people were weighing in on them early enough that we were able to kind of keep a lot of those things, I think, consistent throughout there were a couple things that changed, as we went through the process, but that's kind of the only way you can actually have this much variety, like a show like Moon Knight, where there's so many different environments, so many different characters, so many different effects. It's the only way to actually achieve that on a shortened timeline. I mean, all this stuff was sort of done, really in about a year and a half of full kind of production time. And our actual post schedule was very short. It was only about maybe 6 months or something from the time we got back from Budapest. So I was working on post and visual effects development while we were filming, and it was really the only way to do it. But again, I had two supervisors. I had two additional supervisors one was covering main unit, one was covering second unit, just so that I could be prepping, pre-vising, post-vising, doing visual effects development, all that stuff kind of like in concert with the actual filming, and also just planning, all these meetings that I was talking about with Stefania or with our DPs or with Megan, these are all these kind of critical meetings that if you didn't figure stuff out, we were shooting in a week from now, or we're shooting a couple of days from now, and it'd be like, you just get the machine would stop. So, but yeah, the process with Marvel was really pretty amazing, because we all felt like we all had a hand in kind of keeping that machine running and keeping it creative, and keeping the vision of what Mohammed had, or what Justin Aaron had, elevating it and getting that to appear on screen.
Yeah, I can. I mean, it comes off the screen. Before we do a bit more of a deep dive, we should talk about the gods. Like Khonshu in particular. I just thought that was so breathtaking. It was so ephemeral and just gorgeous work there. And I remember Andrew and Greg, the cinematographers, were talking through how that they had to shoot it in a certain way because of his huge you know, the way that he was conceptualized, and the way that you guys were able to make that look even more elevated. Even Amit, you know, Tower, there's just really amazing work for doing character work. Is that something that you really relish doing when you're doing actual character work where they look, you know, quite real?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a big challenge for me. I hadn't done anything that was this sort of involved character wise. Mulan was supposed to have a bigger character with the Phoenix, and it kind of got downsized as we proceeded in our in the post work. But these guys, we knew they were going to be big, and they were going to be you know, a big part of the storytelling. And so from the early meetings with Grant Curtis, our Marvel sort of he was our Marvel executive. He was our main conduit to Marvel. We talked about always having a performer on set, always having them in costume, which is, again, is different than sort of, you know, normally you put someone in a gray suit, you motion capture them, and you replace them with a full CG thing. But I wanted to have something on camera that we could all look at, that we could light, that we could, you know, appreciate, the actors could appreciate, that then our visual effects teams could emulate. And so, you know, with Amit, or sorry, with Conchu as the first example, you know, he's got the most screen time. And so Conchu, we had it, we knew it was going to be performed by somebody. This actually happened to be a friend of Muhammad's, a guy named Kareem, and he, I forget his surname, but he wore a costume that Megan and their team created. I know it was extremely complicated to make this thing because there was so many layers of material, but we had him he's about 6'6". So eyeline wise, when we could, we'd have him stand on a box, on like a 2.5 foot box, and then he'd hit the 9 foot height for Oscar. Sometimes we'd have him wear an eyeline pole, which was like a lightweight, like composite material that our props master Derek created, and it was a bit of a comp pole on a backpack. And then we also had a 3D printed and sculpted Conchu skull that was full scale, 3 feet long, on the end of a stick, that we had built, and we had that on set as well. So we had all these really good you know, reference tools. But in the end, you know, the performance, so much of how Conchu moves is based on what Kareem's doing. And of course, you know, we ended up doing using the voice of F. Murray Abraham, but that was kind of a later decision. So, you know, but a lot of the performance was based on what Kareem was doing. And we actually Framestore started pretty early. We had a Zoom recorded video test of him just doing like a screen test of a couple different lines from the show. And we gave those to Framestore, even just with a single camera. We didn't have the dual camera or 3-camera witness camera, any of that kind of setup. And even with that, they still were able to do a really great, promising early test. And so that's how we knew, okay, well, this is going to work. We did the same thing for Taweret. We did the same thing for Amit, although Amit was a little different.
Yeah. Just the detail on Taweret with her, you know, with her ears flapping, and he's just a really delightful character. I just wish we got to see more of that of the show, actually, because I just felt like after 6 episodes, I'm like, what's happening next? Hopefully, they may bring some of it back in a new series.
It'd be great to see the adventures of Scarlet Scarab and Taweret.
I think so. I think they probably are working on that.
Let's hope so. But yeah, Antonia, who performed Taweret, I mean, she was a home run from the time we first sort of saw her screen test. Same thing. We had a few pieces. And then Framestore did this great thing where they chopped up her audition tape, essentially, and then added little beeps in between. It was like something you'd see from like the gag reel of Monsters Inc. or something. And they just had her sort of like, you know, doing these lines, beep, like, you know, messing up, whatever it was. And it was so cute. And it was just something, it was like viral, you know, within the production team, because I just kept showing to everybody, and everyone was like, hey, can you show me that Taweret tape? I want to see it. And it just, you know, we knew we had someone who was super charming performing her, but I think Framestore and Chris Hurt, who's their Annam supervisor, I think he nailed that character. It just, and Stuart Penn, their VFX supervisor, they really just respected the character so well. And again, we sent materials for Megan. They know we had and Tony was wearing a full costume. So, we had all these samples that we had sent for Towrette to Framestore. And then we did the same thing for Amit. Weta created Amit. And, for Amit that was performed by Sophia. And so she was wearing a full costume. And we tried a couple of things with them where they had asked us to do some of the, we had her wearing an X-Sense markerless motion capture suit. So she wore that for a couple of the really big days. But then other days we were just doing it with witness cameras, more of the kind of low tech approach.
It's amazing. I think you just have one of the coolest jobs, to be honest. So you have a lot of stuff to choose from in terms of your highlights. I think probably the finale is the most VFX heavy with all the climactic battle sequences. And would you say that was probably the one for you? And if it was, like, what techniques come into play on such a CGI heavy installment like the finale?
Well, I mean, I think the finale benefited from previs a lot. And, we had actually, we were prevising those sequences before we had a script. And, hats off to the Framestore pre-production services team. We actually used those guys for our previs, and we used them for most of our post-viz, but actually we had so much post-viz on this. We also had post-viz from the third floor, who also did a fantastic job. But the previs we had created, again, that was one of the things I was working on while they were still shooting. We were just playing, trying things out, and then getting in front of Muhammad and getting in front of Grant and trying to sort of find story points. And so what we see in the end is something that was kind of like pieces that were inspired by previs, written properly by the screenwriters, and then they would give us back stuff, and then we would try to sort of previs new pieces to kind of bridge stuff that they had written versus stuff that we had just come up with. And so now you've got this digital set established by the previs that Weta had in their hands from a pretty early date. And again, thankfully we had that, because I think we couldn't have achieved it without that, especially considering the fact that, typically on something like this, you'd want to go to Cairo, you'd want to shoot plates, you'd want to, do a proper LiDAR acquisition of the pyramid Giza area, or the entire, Giza neighborhood, and all the buildings that kind of surround the whole city that surrounds the actual Giza thing. But we couldn't get there. We had the one good thing we had was that one of our soups, Dan Akers, had gone to Cairo on a 5-day like tech scout. Basically, he had gone there just to kind of figure out what are the things that we're going to want to shoot better. And he thankfully shot a crap load of photography, and some of which we were able to use. But we didn't have LiDAR. We didn't have all that stuff that you normally would want to get. So we had to kind of piece it together. Weta was able to buy like a geo survey of Cairo that was very low res, but it gave them kind of a general layout of like building scale and general densities of buildings. But like when you zoomed in on it, all the buildings looked like, mush. There was nothing really there. These guys had to actually create all the buildings and then repopulate it. The Giza area was something that thankfully, because Disney owns, Disney is Marvel, Disney is also Fox, and the Death on the Nile team 2 years ago had gone and done some LiDAR and some photogrammetry drone passes of some of the pyramids. So we basically gave all that material, because that was all kind of in the Disney archives. We gave that to Weta. They had to kind of rebuild a lot of stuff themselves, do their own photogrammetry passes, do their own. And of course, there was a lot of, artistry going on there to fill in the gaps. And there's good reference photography of the Giza pyramids, but there's not a lot of really high res stuff, so these guys really had to kind of create a lot of that. So again, hats off to the Weta team for actually pulling this off. It's pretty awesome. But the end battle was a combination of a really incredible backlot set of the Cairo streets that Stefania and her team built. and then a the wider shot, or the when you're in the pyramid world, that is a digital environment created by Martin Hill and Weta. Martin was their supervisor. Yeah, and again, I think we stuck to a lot of the previs. If you actually A/B between previs and final shots, we didn't veer that far. Once we got into actual production, we kind of said, okay, these are our shots. I worked very closely with our editor, Cedric, on that a lot of those sequences. So we kind of knew, and if you'd said, hey, I just need a shot that could do this, I'd work with Third Floor and post viz or previs or create a new shot, or I would work with Frame Store. This was sort of in the earlier days when we were prevising still, but either way, I had a way of getting sort of a quick version of a shot that he could cut with, and then working with Weta to actually tie it all together.
Yeah, it sounds exhausting. Like, yeah, I'm not surprised that you have to stick really close to the pre-visualization work, because there's just so much going on, and you have to make sure that it comes off perfectly, and it does, Sean. Mate, congratulations on some beautiful work. I'm hoping to see you on the Emmys red carpet. You deserve to be there, and I look forward to your next project, mate. Don't tell me what you're working on, because it's probably
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate the time, man. Take care, guys.